So, yeah, we started the recording. It's 7:30, 7:45. So we'll start right away. এএসএ আমাদের টোটাল পেপার ছিল হচ্ছে 3টা। এএসএ পেপার ছিল হচ্ছে পেপার 1 এমসিকিউ 40 মার্কস, পেপার 2 স্ট্রাকচার্ড কোশ্চেন 60 মার্কস, পেপার 3 ল্যাব 40 মার্কস, টোটাল হচ্ছে 140 মার্কস। এটাকে কনভার্ট করা হয় টোটাল এ লেভেলস এর জন্য 50%। A2 তে আমাদের পেপার হচ্ছে দুইটা। We have paper 4 which has 100 marks. It's a 2-hour exam. And we have paper 5 which is a 30 mark. This is a 1-hour exam. So altogether এখানে mark হচ্ছে 130, which is 10 marks different. This is converted into another 50%, and eventually these two are combined into a total 100% mark, and the total A levels grade is done. One thing that I really want all of you to understand and very clearly understand and really care for this information. এই ইনফরমেশনটা আমি সব একটু পেজের শুরুতে খুব কেয়ারফুলি বলি, and I want all of you to remember this. It's very important. সেটা হচ্ছে এএসএ তোমরা যে রেজাল্ট করছো, provisional result, it's called a provisional result because the life duration or কি বলে এটা মানে the expiry date of this result is exactly 1 academic year. What it means is that if you have sat for your O-levels AS exam, or if you have well, you did not actually sit for your AS exam because of the whole COVID situation and everything, so you have pretty grades depending upon your assignments and stuffs and model tests and everything, evaluation, that's what I call it. You have had your evaluation for this year's May-June 2021, so you are examiners of AS paper for this session. You can carry forward this result up to the latest for May-June 2022. If you sit for your A2 in the ON 2021, you can also carry forward this thing in this session as well. But many of you, most of you, as we understand, are not going to go for the October-November 2021. It's just knocking at the door, and we don't usually go for it. So you're gonna go for, you have appeared your AS over here, and you're gonna appear your A2 over here, and the lifespan of this provisional result is exactly this 1 academic year. Why this information is important? I mean, why am I emphasizing this so much? Because hear me out. What I'm about to tell you is to actually scare you, and I want you to be scared and be careful about this scare. The information is, if you somehow mess up your A2 exam in this session and you fall into the situation that you might need to do a retake or reappearing the physics paper or any paper for the matter, physics, chemistry, or bio, math, whatever, you will have to appear all the 5 papers for the next retake. Your AS result is only valid up to this 1 academic year, and you have to carry forward your AS result whenever you're registering for your A2 results in this academic year. Whatever your A2 results that you get, your AS results from the earlier academic year plus the A2 results of this academic year, May-June 2022, are going to get added together to give you the total result, and you're going to have a total A levels result for the somewhere around let's say September or October when the results come out. And that's it. That is it. If you somehow mess up your A2 exam and you have a grade or a situation that you might feel like that you have to reappear the exam, you have to sit for all of these 5 papers once again. That is, this provisional result will not be valid anymore. Do you get my point? Yes, I'm not kidding. You can check this information with any of your teacher of any subject, chemistry, math, or any other subject that you have, English or business studies, accounting, whatever. Your AS result is a provisional result with a lifespan of exactly 1 academic year period. No more. এই ইনফরমেশনটা কি সবাই বুঝছো?
তো স্যার নেক্সট এক্সামটা কখন সেট করতে হবে?
ওয়েল, তোমার ডেফিনেটলি A2 এক্সাম অ্যাপিয়ার করবা হচ্ছে, তোমাদের তো এস এক্সামের রেজাল্ট হয়ে গেছে, সো তোমরা তোমাদের অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট বলো বা হচ্ছে মডেল টেস্ট রেজাল্ট বলো, ইভ্যালুয়েশন থেকে তোমরা এস এর একটা প্রফেশনাল রেজাল্ট অলরেডি তোমার যেই সেন্টার থেকে রেজিস্ট্রেশন করছো, ড্যাফোডিল বলো বা হচ্ছে একাডেমিয়া বলো বা ব্রিটিশ কাউন্সিল থেকে বলো, প্রাইভেট এক্সামিনেশন হিসেবে বলো বা মাস্টারমাইন্ড থেকে বলো, whatever school that you, whatever center number you have registered from, you have a provisional result for your AS levels. These provisional results might be available to your hand after a couple of days. That can be a bit of a variable, but you're going to have some sort of result based upon your performance. but that result has an acceptable lifespan of exactly 1 academic year. That's the information I want all of you to understand. If you mess up your A2 exam at any level and you have to take a retake, you have to apply for the entire A levels once again, all of the 5 papers. For physics, if it's for another subject, another 5 paper. So the point that I'm trying to make is that you cannot mess up your A2 exam. You have to do well enough in your A2 papers so that combinedly you get a good enough grades. বুঝতে পারছি?
So, sir, if we mess up the results of A2, that means we need to spend 2 more years for completing the whole A level.
যারা আমি বুঝি নাই, আরেকবার বলো, একটু জোরে বলো, মাইক্রোফোনের কাছে এসে বলো একটু।
Sir, বলতেছিলাম যে মানে if we mess up A2, that means that we need to spend 2 more years on A levels again.
No, not necessarily. You don't have to spend 2 more years. I mean, technically speaking, if you, let's say, I hope it not doesn't happen, God forbid, but let's say somehow the A2 results are messed up. You can register for all the papers P1 through P5 in the next ON 2022. You can do that, and you can appear for all the 5 papers, and eventually you can, if you can make up a good result, if you're happy with the results, you can move on with your life. No big deal. You can register all the 5 papers in a single session if you want, but you have to appear for all the 5 papers. That's my point. It's not essential that you have to appear for another year. Let's say you have to sit for May June 2023. I mean, appearing these 5 papers in 2 different academic sessions is a style of study that we within the Southeast Asia we actually prefer, because to distribute the load of the paper, and that's how we are accustomed it from our Bangla medium system as well. But if any student is capable enough or willing to appear for all the papers in a single sitting, they can do it. No big deal. In Middle East, in Dubai, a lot of the kids actually do that. They take a study period of about 1 year. Some people take 1.5 years. Some appear for all the 5 papers in one session. Some appear, let's say, 3 papers in the May June session, the other 2 papers in the October session. But they start the entire course within the same time span, appear for 2 different states just to lower the load. But we over here in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, within these countries, we typically go for 2 whole academic year, the May June session for AS and then the A2 in the other May June session. So you do not have that privilege of what can I say, flexibility. You don't have to spend another 2 years. The answer to your question is a no, but you have to appear for all the 5 papers once again. All of your earlier provisional AS results, they would be invalidated after exactly 1 academic year. That's my point.
All right, sir.
বুঝা গেছে?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is nothing to be worried about, and I don't expect you to take too much pressure about this. I just want you to understand that this is the information that you should have in your mind every single time you're studying for your A2 levels. That, and this is actually true for all the subjects as well. So you should have at least that much sincerity and what can I say, devotion, if that's the correct word in this case, I'm not sure. You should have that so that you do not mess up this A2 level. That's all I'm asking. It can prove to be difficult from time to time, like every other subject, like every other paper, like every class that you have been through, class 1 through class 10, 11, 12, whatever. All chapters are not going to look peachy. All chapters are not going to look easy. All chapters are not going to be difficult either. But whatever you do, you have to be prepared for the holistic preparation, the total deal of A2 preparation, so that your A levels result is available to you at the end of your A2 session, so that you do not have to sit for all the other papers as well. And to be honest, this information, as long as you remember this and you don't forget this, can work as a very good motivation for each and every one of you. I mean, if you ever feel like not studying up, and if you feel like that life পড়াশোনা করে কি হবে and blah blah blah, and আমার কি হবে, আমি তো কিছু পাই না, হ্যান তেন, হ্যান পড়াশোনা খারাপ, হ্যান তেন, আব্বু বকা দিছে, and ঝামেলা, আমার ব্রেকআপ হইছে, হ্যান তেন তেন, I have a problem with my gender determination, blah blah blah. What sort of মানে bullshit or realistic problem that you have within your head? If you are not feeling like study, just remember this information, that if I somehow mess up my A2 papers, I have to sit for all the 5 papers to make a good result of this subject. I mean, all the study part, all the harassment, all the sleepless nights that I had to do for the AS duration, all of those efforts are simply gonna result to basically 0. I have to sit for the other papers as well. You just remember that in your head. as far as I understand, if I was a student and when I used to be a student, this worked as a very good motivation for me. This scare that I think I can make my point across. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, sir, it does.
So yep. The reason I'm looking to the right because my video feed is right here. I mean, my video feed is right there. So that's why I'm every once in a while, whenever I'm looking at this corner, I'm actually looking at my video feed, and I can see that I'm looking at some angle. Unless, but I should be looking right through here. But anyway, I'm having my video minimized, not to distract myself. So that's one thing. As for the A2 paper, paper 4 is a structured paper, which is a 2-hour duration paper. We have 100 marks in it. And paper 5 is also a written paper, which has 30 marks in it. There are 2 questions over here. This is a 1-hour exam. I'm going to talk to you about paper 5 a little bit in this first introduction class, and then I'm going to go for the paper 4. Paper 4 is the very core paper that we're going to take most of our time for our A2 course. Paper 5 is also a pretty important paper. You have to do well in the paper 5 altogether to make a good result in your A2 level as well. But paper 5 is somewhat that is absolutely new or unique to your understanding. তোমরা O levels এ P4 দিছো কে কে অল্টারনেটিভ প্র্যাকটিক্যাল অ্যাপ্লাই করছো কে কে কেউ কি করছো anyone other than applying the P3 which is the actual lab exam, did any of you appear for P4 in your O levels? No. All right. Or maybe you did, or maybe you didn't go for O levels at all. For example, I can see that no, she's here. Ashabila is here, so she's from SSC level. So let me just clarify this thing. In O levels, there are practically 3 papers. So we have P1, which is this is for O level. I'm talking about a bit about O level. We have P1, which is the MCQ paper. P2 is the structured question, the written answer question. And these 2 papers are compulsory. There is no option. And for the 3rd paper, we have an option for P3 or P4. P3 happens to be the actual lab exam. It's a 2-hour exam with 4 questions, and you have to actually handle the lab equipments to go for the whole setup and everything. And P4, on the other hand, is an alternative to practical, where you sit for an 1-hour exam. This is a 2-hour exam, and this is a 1-hour exam, but they are both 30 marks. The mark is exactly the same. P4 is a written version of a lab experiment, multiple lab experiments, to be honest. So they give you some questions, some diagrams, some hypothetical scenarios, some equipment names. Sometimes they give you a problem and ask you to write the possible equipments you're going to require. So it's a total deal about how to do a lab experiment successful, or multiple lab experiments successful. But you don't have to handle any equipment for this paper. It's a totally written paper. They're going to give you all the questions, and there will be enough information that is going to check your capability for how much do you know to use lab environment. So it's just it's called alternative to practical paper, which means it's just that you need the same amount of understanding for the same for the lab experience, for the lab course. I mean, the way CIE describes it is that the entire course of lab is not choice, but how the students can be evaluated depending upon the amount of CIE required lab facilities in different countries, because CIE offers their course syllabus in a lot of rich and also in a lot of poor countries. Some countries do not have enough lab supports as the CIE requirements. So some people can actually go for the P4, which is a written version of the lab experience. So if kids have a good understanding for how the equipments work and how the experience work, they can sit for this. So P4 is basically a written version of a lab experiment exam. Now for the P5 is a similar paper. P5 is similar paper. Just before I tell you, let me just show you a question for the P5 so that it can make a better sense to you. Let me pick up any of the past year question, maybe S18. So question number 51. All right, so this is the paper 5. The paper 5 name is a bit mouthful: planning, analysis, and evaluation. So we have 2 questions over here. So the exam duration is 1 hour 50 minutes. I was a bit mistaken. It's 1 hour 50 minutes, 50 minutes more. which is a good thing, obviously. And then if you have a look at the question number 1, have a look at this question. Let me just help you understand what is this question is about. A student is investigating the force between two charged metal spheres S and T as shown in figure 1.1. Each sphere may be charged by connecting the positive lead from a power supply to the sphere and then removing the lead. The electromagnetic force EMF of the power supply used to charge the sphere is V. So we're going to charge them up by using a DC source. The force F between the two charged spheres may be determined by attaching a sphere S to a top pen balance. So we're going to place this onto a top pen balance because of the repulsion is going to be pushed downwards. And then we can measure how much push is there by taking a reading of that balance value. For a constant charge on sphere S, it is suggested that the relationship between F and V is given by F equals to alpha V divided by R squared. R in this case is represented as the distance between the center of the two spheres. Design a laboratory experiment to test the relationship between F and V. Explain how your results could be used to determine a value for alpha. You should draw a diagram on page 3 showing the arrangement of your equipment. In your account, you should pay particular attention to the procedure to be followed, the measurements to be taken, the control of variables, the analysis of the data, and any safety precautions to be taken. So this question number 1 is basically the planning part of the paper 5. What this question is about is that you are gonna be given a certain formula or a certain theory. For example, right over here, we have given a certain equation and we are shown a small figure to give us a bit of an idea what we're looking for to achieve. And you will have to design a laboratory experiment to check that relationship or to find out as the value of a certain constant or a certain variable. So it's basically you have to be able to direct a laboratory kid or a laboratory examinee or laboratory or a basic normal person who's going to enter into a physics laboratory and be able to use all the necessary equipments, arrange them in a proper order, take necessary data using appropriate equipments, following your instruction, and eventually they will be able to successfully do that experiment. So one way to think about it is like that you are basically trying to provide a manual, detailed manual for a certain experiment, following which any random person who has the basic understanding of English language and the laboratory is equipped with all labeled equipment, they're going to be able to pull up all the equipments as necessary, set up the whole thing by reading your written instruction, and they're going to be able to do the whole experiment. So that's what question number 1 is more or less about. You have to provide a detailed way for how to do an experiment. And in that experiment, you have to mention a lot of these things. You can see all the bullets over here. What is the procedure? So how should arrange your equipment? And then what measurements should you take? So you have to mention the specific name of the equipment, measuring instruments, and what measurements you're going to take multiple times, repeat and average. If there is a possibility of error, for example, whenever you are trying to measure some liquid level, there is a possibility for parallax error. If you are trying to measure some time using a stopwatch, then there is a possibility for human reaction time. Then if you are trying to measure the length of a simple pendulum, you have to add the radius of the bob with the length of the string, those things. I mean, every itsy bitsy minute details should be included in your description so that the experiment can be well performed. That's the whole idea of question number 1, to provide holistic information, a total package of information so that a certain experiment or a certain theory or certain equation, certain relationship can be checked appropriately. And also we have to also provide some significant safety precautions. Safety precaution means that while doing this experiment, we should also make sure that the person who is doing the experiment is not injured anyhow. Human safety comes first. And then if the experiment itself does not actually pose any significant human threat, for example, if you're doing some pendulum experiment, you are highly unlikely to get damage from a pendulum experiment unless someone is doing really stupid stuff. So on a normal case, a person is not supposed to get hurt by a pendulum experiment. So if experiment does not pose significant human threat, then you need to write about the safety of the equipment, that how can we use the equipment in a more sustainable way. For example, if you are doing a basic electric circuit, we should never connect the positive and the negative end of the supply directly without the use of any resistor. That's one of the safety precautions, so that your power source, whether it's a battery or a variable DC source, is not burned out. It doesn't become short-circuited and overcurrent flows and overheating burns out your fuse or your whole coil of the device. So these kind of safety precautions are also very much important, so that the person who is doing the experiment is actually not harmed. So that's basically the idea of question number 1. I'm going to teach you how to handle these questions. This might look a bit detailed or bit far-fetched. You might be wondering that there can be so many different things that we might have to deal. How can we possibly have a grasp on all of these ideas? Well, that's where I come. I'm going to teach you how to handle these questions. There is a streamlined way for handling this equipment. You just have to know the name of some, let's say, 6 to 8, I think 8 new equipments. For example, the device that measures the number of steps of a person, or actually the device that measures distance, horizontal distance, is called pedometer. The device that measures the speed of wind is called anemometer. Then something like that. There are some other devices like this. We can use Hall Pro for certain things. I'm going to teach you how to use light gates to measure the speed of an instantaneous speed of an object. So there are certain new ways to measuring certain variables, and we are also used to we are allowed to use high-speed camera feed for many of our experiment purposes whenever required. So using a high-speed camera and using the slow motion of the camera by frame can actually help for a lot of significant time measurement, other than going for a really stopwatch or electronic mechanism. So we have a lot of opportunities to flourish our ideas, and because there are so many different ways an experiment can be designed, and multiple ways can be successful to do an experiment. So these questions can have a lot of different acceptable answers. So scoring a good mark in this question is really not that difficult unless you are really unmindful. I'm not going to use the word dumb, because I believe none of you are dumps, because you have come this far across in your life. So none of you are dumb. That's highly impossible. Unless you're unmindful, you cannot mess this up. You can always score some good amount of mark, provided you are willing to score good marks. That's all I'm going to say. Any question? I mean, you do have a lot of question, I understand, but whatever I just said, did this part make sense? If you have any question regarding what I said. Anyone?
No, sir.
স্যার ঠিক আছে।
All right. So that's for the question number 1. This is what we call the planning question. And then comes question number 2. Question number 2 is basically a mathematical joyride. I use this word term because question number 2 is basically like solving Rubik's Cube. How many of you can solve a Rubik's Cube? Anyone? Acha, maybe not. Okay, I'll give you easier.
চেষ্টা করেছি।
Okay, I'll give you an easier example. Question number 2 is like eating kachi biryani. I mean, you walk in a restaurant, you order, you wash your hands, you wait for the food, you eat the food, then you burp, then you pay the bill, then you come out. So there are fixed steps for how to eat kachi biryani properly. Question number 2 is exactly like that. You are given some set of data. So you are given a certain scenario, you're given a certain equation, and you are given a pre-measured experiment obtained data over here. You have to fill out certain columns over here, and this is where you have to be able to calculate uncertainties. Remember from chapter 1, measurement chapter, quantities and measurement chapter, uncertainties. You can see there are uncertainties over here. So whenever you're going to be calculating 1 by x squared, in this column you have to put the 1 by x squared values and also the relevant uncertainties of those values as well. And then you have to do some graph plotting, and you have to also represent those uncertainties as error bars. I'm going to show you what those things are. Just give me so something like this. So these are what you call error bars. So you're gonna plot the point. These center values are the actual coordinate of these points, and this plus minus are the variation of that of that point that you have plotted. So you can have different values. For example, you can have like these. Something in many cases we actually go for vertical error bars, but some graphs can also have horizontal error bars. If whenever you are gonna go up in your level, for example, let's say if you're gonna do some master's level thesis or PG level thesis, you can also have, for a single point, you can have multivariable you can have uncertainties on both axes. Where are those pictures? There are some, yeah, for example, these kind of points, these points actually represent these are the points where we have uncertainties in both axes, and these are the points where we have uncertainty only in one axis. So these are the variables where we only have uncertainty for the y-axis values. Here we can have uncertainty for both the x-axis and also the y-axis value. That's why they have horizontal error bar and also vertical error bars. For your syllabus P5, you're gonna only deal with one axis of error bar. So most of your graphs, let's say I'd say 95% of your graphs are vertical error bars, but some very few, let's say 2 or 3 graphs are there where you might have to plot horizontal error bars. They are very unique, but works in the very same way. It's just flat other than vertical, so it's not a big deal. So you have to be able to plot these values over here and plot all these values over here. Then you have to draw a best fit line. Then you have to do a worst fit line. That's a new thing. I'm going to teach you how to deal with that. Then you have to measure the gradient of both of these lines, and then you have to do some relevant calculation using those gradient values, and eventually that's basically your thing. So this is basically like it can eventually become a walk in the park for you. It can prove to be very easy for you. It's a total mathematical problem. You have a lot of data, then you start the whole thing, and then you slowly go through the whole process, and as a result finally you can have this thing finished pretty well. It's a mathematical problem, so as long as you are comfortable with your calculator, you're gonna have no problem with this thing. So you have to learn how to use your calculator a bit more effectively. I'm gonna help you learn it, but you have to have the willingness to accommodate that information within your brain. That's all I'm asking. The way I usually recommend the students to answer paper 5 paper in the A levels is that you have 1 hour 50 minutes for this paper. So you receive this paper, you read question number 1 2 times at least, if possible 3 times. Read the entire question number 1 3 times. Take 10 minutes 15 minutes for that reading, no big deal. Just read the question number 1, and then you skip question number 1, jump to question number 2. Finish question number 2 within a duration of about 25 to maximum 30 minutes. You should not take more than 30 minutes. If you can take less than 25 minutes, that's really good. But it should not take, you should not take more than 30 minutes. And it's very much possible to finish the entire question number 2 within 30 minutes. So at that point, you have 30 minutes left to answer question number 1. The beauty of reading the question number 1 first is that, because I am assuming you're going to have a standard preparation. Standard preparation means that you have been studious and you have been careful, and with a little bit of lapse every once in a there, because we cannot study continuously. None of us can perform continuously, so you can have a little bit of gap in between. But in general, you are careful for your whole syllabus progression, and you actually attempted some of this paper. You did question papers, you appeared for the mocks. You know how paper 5 works, so that's what I'm assuming to be a standard preparation. Provided you have a standard preparation, once you read through your question number 1, your brain in that minimized mode is going to prepare all the itsy bitsy points for the whole figure and whole experiment within your head. By that time you are going to be done with your question number 2, which is going to be done your active part of the brain. Your subconscious behind the back of your brain will pretty much produce all the required points that you want to write for this question number 1. So you do not have to spend active time for your question number 1. So you read question number 1, take the concept, jump to question number 2, solve it like a robot. By the time you come back to question number 1 to answer, you pretty much have everything ready in your head. That usually works pretty much for everyone. So that's how I recommend to approach this paper. I'm going to help you solve this paper, and for your A2 syllabus, I actually teach both of these papers at the same time. So typically the way it works is that I take 4 or 5 classes to introduce the kids how paper 5 works, because that introduction is pretty important. It's elaborate introduction. And then I help the kids to solve some easy papers so that they actually understand how this paper works. And I also teach them how to utilize the mark scheme and also the examiner's report for question number 1 more specifically. And question number 2 is also taught at the same time. And then once we are done with that introduction part in 4 or 5 classes, then I start to give out homeworks. And you are going to receive an entire bundle of past year question paper for paper 5 with all the solutions as well. So you do not have to buy it for the timing. It's a binded workbook like earlier years. You can fold it over and use it for your purpose. And I have also tried my best to make sure that all the tables are on the left side page and all the graphs are on the right side page, so that you don't have to flip back and forth to place your data. So you're gonna attempt those papers. So, and then on every class we're gonna discuss a certain paper depending upon what we gave out as the homework. So that's usually how it works. And this is June or July? June, right? June na
Yes,
এখন?
sir.
হ্যাঁ, June. So starting from July, I'm gonna do our classes in such a way that, let's say, within 1 month we are gonna have 8 classes. So we're gonna, every fourth class we're gonna settle for a P5 class. So let's say, I mean, typically the way I used to do it is that, uh, how can I say this? The first class after 10th of the month is going to be the P5 class, after 10th, not on 10th. And the first class after the 28th is going to be another P5 class. So you're going to have you're going to have 2 classes every month, so that you have about 2 classes out of your 8 classes in one month duration. So you have 2 classes for P5. But in many cases it was actually changed. What happened in our last batch, kids who actually passed out this year, is that when we started the P5, kids got pretty interested in it, and their school exams were also coming up. So many of the students were in a bit of a rush to actually learn how to do P5, because apparently the school help was proving not to be entirely completing. I'm definitely sure it was very helpful, but it was not completing for their requirement. So we took some extra classes within the routine, not taking P4 class. We actually continued on the P5 class, and that was not a big deal. It pretty much helped a lot of the people for their purposes. So that can also happen. It's on a need to know basis, on a need to accomplish basis. P5 can prove to be pretty simple if you follow instruction. It can prove to be very difficult if you are not tagging along. If you are not tagging along as the class is going to progress, at a certain point you're going to find yourself in the center of a unsolvable puzzle. So it's easy as long as you stick around, and I'll make it easy for you. That's my job. You just have to make sure that you are not leaving us. Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
I think it works. Okay. কি ঘামতেছি? Why can't I? Okay, if I keep my screen exactly at the center, then it would appear that I'm looking at the center. তোমরা কেউ কি আদতে আমার ক্যামেরা দেখতেছো?
স্যার এখন শো করতো।
না ক্যামেরা বলতে
বাদ দিয়ে দেই?
If that makes you feel more comfortable, sure, sir.
বুঝি নাই।
এটা যদি আপনাকে বেশি কমফোর্টেবল ফিল করে তাহলে obviously
No, I am not at all comfortable for the camera. I would like not to have the camera. I just attempted the camera because one of my colleagues actually convinced me that you should have at least your camera on, so that the kids can have, at least they can have a little bit of human interaction. I mean, you speaking through a computer screen works, but it's not ideal. I was sold to this idea because he was very convincing. That's why the camera is here. Anyway, if you need to see me, just give a shout out. I'll turn on the camera. For that, I mean the camera is turned off. Okay, so that was for paper 5. Little bit of short description for how the paper 5 works. And as for the paper 4, we have a couple of chapters in paper 4. Other than me writing all the name of the chapters, I can actually try the name of the chapters, but what works easier if I take a screenshot from here. So yep, being the person as I am, reducing effort is always paramount. There you are. So these are the chapters that we have. From number 1, the chapter number 1 is circular motion and gravitation. Actually, I have divided the worksheets pretty much like your AS level, that I have divided the worksheets based upon the style of question that the actual A levels exam set out for. So they typically give out the circular motion and the gravitation chapter question within a single question. So that's why I have made these 2 chapters in a single worksheet, so that it's easier for me to make those compilation. So that's one chapter number 1. Number 2 is simple harmonic motion. Then we have thermal properties. You should remember that you have learned about your heat capacity and stuffs in your O levels. Your entire A syllabus you didn't have any of the heat energy calculation, or thermal was altogether absent from your AS syllabus. It it is once again showing up in A2. Thermal properties is a pretty interesting chapter for you for your A2 syllabus, and it's actually quite elaborate. I'll help you understand all the stuffs, but there can be a lot of equations. Number 4 is capacitors and electric field. So it's a significantly higher expansion of the idea of static electricity, how it works, and relevant usage of those things. And then we have electromagnetism. Electromagnetism was also absent in AS, but it is once again showing up in this chapter. And then we have charged particles. Okay, charged particles is actually a very small subset of the electromagnetism chapter. I I was making the worksheet, I, for reasons unknown, actually preferred to make a different worksheet for the charged particle worksheet. The charged particle worksheet doesn't have any exclusive theory of its own. It's just a worksheet that is made exclusively of charged particles, moving charged particles, or stationary charged particles, or suspended charged particles in an electric field, where the weight is balanced by the force of the electric field. So weight works downwards and the electric field is working upwards. If you can somehow make them equilibrium, you can actually make an object levitate, just float in empty space, just by achieving equilibrium of force scenario. So I have compiled some of the charged particle problems in a different worksheet, but the theory part is altogether in the electromagnetism. Electromagnetism happens to be one of the largest theoretical chapters for your entire syllabus. It has a lot of stuff within itself. I actually combined, I think, 4 or 5 individual chapters from your syllabus within this chapter 5. So it could look like a mammoth chapter, but hear me out. The reason I have combined all of these topics within a single chapter, because these questions tend to come in under one question heading. For example, let's say in a question paper, there's a question number 4 is for the electromagnetism chapter. So at first they start out with Hall voltage, and then they talk about a little bit about the EMF graph. And so let's say this is your question number A, then your question number B, and then question number C, they directly go out for the full bridge rectifier question. So you have to have all of those things within a single question sometimes. So that's why I have that whole thing within a single worksheet. And then we have photons and photoelectric effect. This is absolutely new for you. Interesting chapter. This is pretty much where we start the idea of the modern physics, where we actually, modern physics means the era of the Einstein thing. And then we have radioactivity. We have new ideas of radioactivity in our AS level. These, up to this 8th chapter, we have the basic theoretical parts of the A2 syllabus, basic core theoretical part. Chapter number 9, 10, and 11. These 3 chapters are individual application based chapters. Application based chapters means that direct sensing is a chapter that basically works about how we can sense a certain data. For example, voice, which works as a vibration or pressure variation, or for example, light intensity that can be sensed by an LDR, or let's say a temperature variation that can be sensed by a thermistor, or let's say ultrasound vibration that can be sensed by a piezoelectric crystal or a silica crystal, quartz crystal. So we can have a lot of physical transducers or physical sensors, let's use the term sensor, which can actually sense multiple different type of physical inputs, and through which we can actually make our stuffs work. I mean, simply put, if you think about it, the way our touch screen works is that you touch on a certain part of the screen, and that actually responds to your commands. So how does that work? I mean, why should a touch screen work? So there is a certain way that touch can be either might be sensed by some bit of a capacitance. It can be also be a bit of a pressure variation. Some touch screen works by both of them, by a combination of both of them. So and also you have also seen that many of the touch screens apparently are only sensitive to human touch, but if you use a piece of wood, it doesn't register that touch screen. So it has a way to distinguish between human touch and wooden touch. So how does those things work? So chapter number 9 is not about all those detailed level of cell phone technology and everything. I'm just giving you some example. So direction chapter is about how can we use different physical input to use for our purpose, and how we can amplify those signals to use it for a better output of the signal. And then we have that's the name of the chapter for data sensing. Then we have remote sensing. Remote sensing chapter is mostly about medical imaging. Medical imaging means that how can we use different type of diagnostic diagnosis within a patient without cutting them open. Without cutting them open means this is called non-invasive it's not diagnosis or treatment. I think it should be diagnosis, non-invasive diagnosis, non-invasive procedure. Yeah, non-invasive procedure. Non-invasive procedure means that, let me give you a simple example. Let's say I'm a patient. Let's say inside my belly there is a problem. Doctors want to have a look at it. So how can the doctors look at it? One way can be cut my belly open and have a look at it, or they can put a video camera with an optical fiber, which is called the endoscopy. They can put this through my mouth, and eventually they can have a look inside. Or they can have some sort of external scan. For example, they can take some ultrasound images, or they can do some CT scan or X-rays, or if required, they can do some MRIs to take a good look about where this problem is and how this problem is looking like. So there are different ways to diagnose a simple problem. This chapter, remote sensing, is mostly about non-invasive procedures. So how does an X-ray work? How does ultrasound scanning works? How does the CT scan work, which is actually computer tomography, which is actually multiple X-rays working towards giving a three-dimensional image? And then how does the MRI works? So these are the four basic diagnosis ways which are going to learn in the remote sensing chapter. And chapter number 11, which is principles of communication, deals with a little bit about how can we transfer data / information from one location to another location. So what are the effective data communication channels that we have? We can have wire pair, we can have coaxial cable, which is the dish lines, dish cable, color cable, we can have optical fibers, we can have satellite communication. So different ways of communication. And then how can we transfer analog communication and digital communication? So that there is a bit of a hodgepodge stuffs for the communication chapter. Chapter number 11 is mostly mathematical with a little bit of touch up for theoretical stuffs. Remote sensing is mostly theoretical with a very small bit of mathematics. Data sensing has a bit of both, about half of. These three chapters, chapter number 9, 10, and 11, earlier means earlier than 2016, I think. 2016 or 2017, somewhere around that. Before that time, syllabus was divided into two sections, section A and section B. Section A was covering this all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 8 chapters. These were the core theoretical parts. And section B was named the application. And section B was comprised with all of these three chapters, 9, 10, and 11. The way it was easy is because getting these questions sorted out was pretty simple because they were all sorted out by default. Since that point of 2016 2017, say introduced a syllabus change, and what they proposed that no, we are not going to do section A and section B for these two chapters individually anymore, because we want the kids to really understand where this use is actually relevant for that certain chapter. We're going to do that. So they now decided that we're going to put the data sensing in the chapter where it is relevant. We're going to put the different segments of remote sensing within the chapters where it's relevant. And we're going to put the principles of communication within the chapters where it's relevant. So let me just show you what I mean by that, because it's easier for me to so yay. So if you have a look over here up to, can I make it, can you read this list through your screen? Is it legible?
Yes, sir.
But these are pretty small fonts. I don't know how can I make this font bigger? I mean, is there a way I can make this thing bigger? Properties, plain, action. পড়া গেলে হবে। So এখানে মনে করো হচ্ছে এই যে শুরুতে আছে কিছু হাবিজাবি কভার টাইটেল কপিরাইট কন্টেন্টস ইন্ট্রোডাকশন হাউ টু ইউজ দিস বুক, and then from chapter 1 goes all the way up to chapter 16 and P1, chapter P1 এটু পর্যন্ত হচ্ছে এস এর হাবিজাবি। So if you go through this chapter heading, you would recognize these chapters, and then from chapter 17 starts the A2 stuffs. So they have made a good segregation over here. What you will find out over here is এই যে দেখো এখানে প্রথম আছে circular motion, gravitational field, oscillation is basically SHM. Right after oscillation we have the communication systems, because the way information is created is by oscillating electric charges. Electromagnetic waves are actually created by oscillating charged particles. So from right after the oscillation they have put the communication systems over here, so which means that this chapter number 12 for my discussion part, principles of communication, was introduced in this level, communication systems. So if you go over here, you have all the individual stuffs of the communication, that how we can do amplitude modulation, how we can do frequency modulation, then how we can handle with the different type of frequency range and bandwidths and stuffs, and how analog data is converted into digital, and how digital data is reconverted back to analog, and what is the grainy stuff, how can we reduce this, signal power, noise power, attenuation, happy jabi, blah blah. But the total deal of the principal communication chapter is now placed over here. So whenever they're gonna so what the CA people do right now, since 2017, is that they actually attach this chapter's question right after the oscillation question. So let's say they have given an oscillation question which goes on for, let's say, 12-15 marks, and then they give you another 5 or 6 mark question after the whole question. Let's say oscillation question goes from A, B, C, D, then at option choice E you're going to have a question regarding the communication system. So they're going to make it introduced within the relevant chapter heading, so that the students don't feel them to be a segregated part of the syllabus. That's what they decided, and that's how the book is now designed, and the syllabus works pretty well for that purpose. And then if you go further, here you can see another chapter right after capacitance, you have another chapter, electronics. So this electronics chapter is basically the op-amp or the direct sensing thing. So we have all the here you can see a lot of the input devices that we talk about. I just talked about, for example, this is a circuit symbol for a microphone, which actually captures the pressure variation, which detects sound. This is what you call a metal wire strain gauge. This is used to measure the physical strain onto a certain object. Most commonly, it was primarily developed for the measuring the strain in the aeroplane wings, because when the airplane is in flight, they have a significant difference in their shape compared to when they are in ground. I mean, when they are in ground, their wings are numbing downwards, but when they are in the sky, they're actually flying. The lift force actually make the wings go upwards. So there's a significant shape change. So it's important to know the individual value of the strain value. So this is also another device that can give us some data. So the whole electronics chapter is introduced over here. And then lastly over here, right after nuclear physics, they've introduced the medical imaging. So medical imaging is the remote sensing chapter. The reason I'm still sticking to the old chapter names, because I find it easier to teach it in that manner. That's just absolutely my personal discretion, that I find this easier to teach within this structure, because I made these compilations earlier and I'm still sticking to it. It still covers the whole syllabus material. It still serves the whole entire purpose for you to be able to do good marks and be able to do everything properly. There is no harm in that. Only whenever you're going to appear for your mocks with me or anywhere else, or whenever you're going to actually appear for your A-levels exam, your questions are not going to show up like this. Rather, this chapter of these questions are going to be input somewhere within these chapters in appropriate places, and you're going to get to know about this if you just solve some of the past year question papers on your own. You're gonna get the hang of it. This is just the way I prefer to teach, so I'm gonna stick to this process. But if you ever need a better direction for how this is gonna be working out for your actual exam, I am all ears and willing to help you at any point of time. No big deal. বুঝে গেছে কিনা?
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা, এখানে আমি একটা জিনিস তোমাদেরকে বলি, সেটা হচ্ছে আমি লেখার সময় এখানে লিখছিলাম, কোথায় যেন লিখছি, এই যে এখানে লিখছি, সেটা হচ্ছে P4 এর যে রিটেন পেপার, এটার টোটাল মার্কস হচ্ছে 100. ইটস এ 2 hour রিটেন এক্সাম। এটুর অনেকগুলো পেপারই আছে যেগুলো হচ্ছে 2 hour এক্সাম। তোমরা কেমিস্ট্রি শুরু করছো?
Yes, sir.
কেমিস্ট্রি 2 hour না, পেপার 4? জানো?
স্যার আমার মনে হয় 1 hour, বাট শিওর হয়ে বলতে পারি না।
I think 2 hour. As far as I understand, সবগুলা পেপার 4ই হচ্ছে, একটু সবগুলা পেপার 4ই হচ্ছে 2 hour করে। তো বলওয়ান আমার যেটা বলতো সেটা হচ্ছে, স্যার ফিজিক্স কেমিস্ট্রি তো পারা যায়, কারণ কিছু ড্রয়িং আছে, কিছু ইকুয়েশন আছে, কিন্তু বায়োলজি পরীক্ষা 2 ঘন্টা লিখতে লিখতে জান খারাপ হয়ে যায়। প্রচুর লিখতে হয় এবং হচ্ছে তোমরা তো ফিজিক্যালি বায়োলজিতে অ্যাকচুয়াল ফিগার আঁকো না, তোমাদের কি ফিগার আঁকা আসে নাকি শুধু ফিগার দেওয়া থেকে লেবেলিং করতে হয় কিরকম?
আগে আসতো স্যার, এখন তেমন আসে না।
মানে এখন ব্ল্যাঙ্ক ফিগার দেওয়া থাকে, দরকার মতো লেবেলিং করতে হয়, তাই তো?
হ্যাঁ,
জি স্যার।
হ্যাঁ, তো ওই জন্য পোলাপান বলতেছিল আমাকে, আগের ব্যাচের পোলাপান যেটা বলছে যে যাদের বায়ো আছে দে আর লাইক যে স্যার বায়োতে প্রচুর লিখতে হয়। আমি এই কথাগুলো তোমাদেরকে এই জন্য বলছি টু গিভ ইউ এ বিট অফ এ হেডস আপ, সেটা হচ্ছে এখনো পর্যন্ত আমার জানার মধ্যে তোমরা কোনো সাবজেক্টে 2 ঘন্টা পরীক্ষা দাও নাই, তোমাদের ম্যাথস বলো বা অন্য যে কোনো সাবজেক্ট বলো, তোমাদের এখনো পর্যন্ত এস পর্যন্ত 2 ঘন্টা বোর্ড এক্সাম কোনোটা হয়েছে? হয় নাই। The longest exam that you appeared, as far as I understand, is O levels এ তোমার পেপার 3 পরীক্ষা যেগুলো ছিল 1 hour 45 minutes, right? এস এর
জি
পরীক্ষা,
স্যার।
এস এর পরীক্ষা ল্যাব এক্সাম তো ডিফারেন্ট, ল্যাব এক্সাম তো 2 hour এক্সাম, ল্যাব এক্সামের পুরো সেটআপটাই ডিফারেন্ট, বাট থিওরিটিক্যাল পরীক্ষা বা রিটেন পরীক্ষার মধ্যে 2 hour এক্সাম ইজ এ প্রিটি লং এক্সাম। কেন আমি তোমাদেরকে এই কথা বলতেছি সেটা হচ্ছে এটা যে 2 ঘন্টা পরীক্ষা একই লেভেল অফ কনসেন্ট্রেশনে দেওয়া বেশ ডিফিকাল্ট। তুমি পরীক্ষা দেওয়া শুরু করবা, তুমি পরীক্ষা দিতে শুরু করবা, লেটস সে তুমি 30 মিনিটস 40 মিনিটস 1 ঘন্টা খুব স্মুথলি পরীক্ষা দিলা, এরপর দেখা গেল হঠাৎ করে একটা সার্টেন ম্যাথমেটিক্যাল কোশ্চেন আনসার মিলতেছে না, বা হচ্ছে একটা সার্টেন কোশ্চেনের ভ্যালু যেটা পজিটিভ আসার কথা তুমি জানো, ক্যালকুলেশন করে খালি নেগেটিভ আসতেছে, বা একটা সার্টেন কোশ্চেন তুমি কোনোভাবেই আনসার করার প্রপার ওয়ে খুঁজে পাইতেছো না, বাট ইউ নো ইউর প্রিপারেশন ওয়াজ প্রিটি গুড, সো ইট আই মিন a lot of things can go wrong what when they are not supposed to go wrong. সো এটা হইতে পারে। সো যদি আমি চাই না এটা হোক, বাট এটা হইতে পারে। সো ইফ ইউ আর থিঙ্কিং টু প্রিপেয়ার ফর দ্য ওয়ার্স্ট কেস সিনারিও, what I always recommend যে তোমাদের 2 hour এক্সামের মধ্যে কখনোই মাথা গরম করা যাবে না। মাথা গরম করে ফেলে একটা বিপদ পরিচিত হচ্ছে, তোমার একটা সিগনিফিকেন্ট অ্যামাউন্ট অফ টাইম তোমার কমে আসবে, যেটা পরে কভার আপ করতে গিয়ে তোমার অনেক খবর হবে। সো it's important to read the entire question paper by giving it some time. This is something that I always recommend, but পার্সন টু পার্সন এটা ভ্যারি করতে পারে। অনেক স্টুডেন্ট আছে যে পুরো কোশ্চেন পেপার পড়ার প্রেশার নিতে পারে না, অনেক স্টুডেন্ট আছে যে পুরো কোশ্চেন পেপার না পড়ে আনসার করতে পারে না। ইট ক্যান ভ্যারি, বাট হোয়াট আই অলওয়েজ রিকমেন্ড, ইউ হ্যাভ দ্য কোশ্চেন পেপার before in your hand, you don't have to read the whole question like word by word, just skim through the paper, একটু একটু দেখলা, ফিগারটা দেখলা, তোমার একটু আইডিয়া হলো যে কোন টপিক থেকে কিরকম কোশ্চেন আসছে। যে আমার গ্র্যাভিটেশনের চ্যাপ্টার থেকে স্যাটেলাইটের উপর কোশ্চেন দিয়েছে, কিন্তু আমাকে হচ্ছে জিপি কে মেজারমেন্টের কোশ্চেন দেয় নাই। আচ্ছা, এটা একটা জিনিস। তারপর তুমি দেখলা হচ্ছে যে তোমার ইলেকট্রোম্যাগনেটিজম চ্যাপ্টারে তোমাকে কিছু গ্রাফের কোশ্চেন দিয়েছে, তুমি জাস্ট কিং টু দ্য পেপার টু গেট এ বিট অফ এন আইডিয়া দ্যাট কোন চ্যাপ্টার থেকে কিরকম কোশ্চেন আসছে। এটা সুবিধাটা হচ্ছে যে কোন একটা সার্টেন কোশ্চেন যদি টোটালি আউট অফ দ্য বক্স হয়, সেই কোশ্চেনের ব্যাপারে তুমি আগে থেকে একটু প্রি অ্যালার্ট থাকতে পারবা। সো ইফ ইউ ফিল লাইক যে এই চ্যাপ্টারের কোশ্চেনটা একটু ডিফিকাল্ট বা একটু নতুন মনে হইতেছে, তাহলে এটা আমি এখন অ্যাটেম্প্ট করবো না, আই ডোন্ট ওয়ান্ট টু রিস্ক দ্য কামনেস অফ মাই হেড, এটা আমি স্কিপ করে চলে যাই, আমি পুরো পেপার শেষ করে তখন এই কোশ্চেন আবার ব্যাক করবো। দিস ক্যান অ্যাকচুয়ালি সেভ ইউ আ লট অফ এফোর্ট, and this can actually save you a lot of, what can I say, wasted time. Ultimately তোমরা পুরো কোশ্চেন পেপারে আনসার করবা, starting from one end going all the way to the back, or starting from the very last question going all the way to the front. Different people have different ways to answer the actual question paper. It's whatever works best for anyone. এটা নিয়ে আমার কোনো কমপ্লেন নেই, এটা নিয়ে আমার কোনো কমেন্ট নেই, এটা নিয়ে আমার কোনো মাথা ব্যথা নেই, বাট আমার কথা হচ্ছে যে মানে কোন একটা সার্টেন কোশ্চেনে স্টাক হয়ে টাইম যাতে ওয়েস্ট না হয়, এই জিনিসটা নিয়ে একটু কেয়ারফুল হবে। এগুলো আমি নিশ্চয়ই তোমাদের পরীক্ষার একটু পরীক্ষার আগে তোমাদেরকে আবার বলবো। আই হোপ ইউ রিয়েলি গেট টু অ্যাপিয়ার ফর দ্য অ্যাকচুয়াল এক্সাম। কারণ অনেকদিন ধরে পোলাপান পরীক্ষা দিতেছে না, সো পোলাপানদের পরীক্ষার কোনো ভালো রেজাল্টের খবর পাইতেছি না। দ্য অনলি গুড নিউজ দ্যাট আই হ্যাড ওভার দ্য এন্টায়ার লাস্ট ইয়ার, সেটা হচ্ছে যে এবার যারা একটু পাস করছে তারা কিছু ভালো ভালো ইউনিভার্সিটিতে চান্স পাইছে। দ্যাটস প্রিটি মাচ ওয়াজ দ্য এন্টায়ার সাকসেস স্টোরি। পোলাপান পরীক্ষা দিতেছে না, বোর্ড এক্সাম দিতেছে না, পোলাপান রেজাল্ট হচ্ছে না, রেজাল্ট হচ্ছে না, কাছে খেতে পারতেছে না। সো ইটস এ ভেরি ব্যাড সিচুয়েশন। মানে আই হেট কোভিড। যাও, এনিওয়ে তোমরা কিছু একটা বলো।
কি বলি?
আচ্ছা, let me ask you this thing. I'd like to turn on my video right there. Let me ask you this thing in general, apart from the P5, এই যে তোমাদের বোর্ড এক্সাম গুলো হইতেছে না, ঠিক আছে, এটা কি মানে কমফোর্টিং নাকি ডিস্ট্রেসিং?
Distressing, sir.
স্যার ডিস্ট্রেসিং লাগে স্যার।
Okay, 3%. Can I have a reaction from all the other 5? If you don't feel like talking,
Distressing as well.
you can give it us in the chat, all chat please. I personally find it highly distressing as a teacher. I mean, I don't feel good at all. I look weird. Yes, never mind. আচ্ছা, so এই হচ্ছে more or less P4 P5 এর হাবিজাবি কাবজাব. So this is what I call the introductory stuff of the A2 syllabus. I don't have anything else to discuss from this part. আমি তো তোমাদেরকে একটা সিঙ্গেল জিনিস একটু দেখায় তারপর হচ্ছে আমি এই সেগমেন্টটুকু শেষ করব, তারপর হচ্ছে অ্যাকচুয়াল ফার্স্ট চ্যাপ্টারের লেকচারে চলে যাব. আর তোমরা বুকলেট কখন আনতে পারবা সেটা আমি তোমাদেরকে 1-2 দিন পরে জানাই দিচ্ছি. বুকলেট এত রেডি হয়ে যাওয়ার কথা. দাঁড়াও.
স্যার ক্লাস টাইমিং নিয়ে কি ক্লাসের শেষে কথা হবেন নাকি?
তোমাদের ক্লাস টাইমিং কি চেঞ্জ করা লাগবে?
স্যার আমার ক্লাস হয়।
কোন দিন ক্লাস হয়?
আমার 2 দিনই ক্লাস হয়।
হাই হাই, কি কোন সাবজেক্ট?
সো স্যার আজকে যেরকম 7টা থেকে ক্লাস স্টার্ট হয়েছে, আমার 8:30 পর্যন্ত ক্লাস ছিল।
আচ্ছা, তারপর
এন্ড থার্সডেতে আমার 8:30 পর্যন্ত ক্লাস, মানে দোনো দিন 8:30 পর্যন্ত ক্লাস।
ওকে, আর কারো সমস্যা হচ্ছে?
স্যার আমার হচ্ছে,
যারা কোন সমস্যা?
স্যার থার্সডেতে ক্লাস হচ্ছে।
1 ঘন্টা?
স্যার 9টা থেকে শুরু হবে ক্লাসটা আমার টুলান স্যারের, তো আপনারটা শেষ হবে 9:30, ওইখানে ক্লাস করছে।
ওকে, তোমরা কি তাহলে সকালে ক্লাস করবা? আমি সকালে ক্লাস নিতে পারি if you all of you agree to shift it in the morning like 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. either day. I'm down.
থার্সডে আমার সকালে ক্লাস আছে।
তাহলে সকালে ক্লাস আছে। ওকে, শেষ হবে কয়টায়?
12টা।
শুরু হবে কয়টায়? 10টায়?
10টায়।
আচ্ছা, টাইমিং নিয়ে একটু পরে আলাপ করতেছি। আমি যে জিনিসটা দেখাতে সেটা দেখা নেই, ঠিক আছে? আমি এটা মাথায় নিলাম, I'm gonna talk about it, ঠিক আছে? আচ্ছা, এই জিনিসটা একটু দেখো তোমাদের এইখানে আচ্ছা, এগুলা হচ্ছে সিআই কিভাবে কি করবে, কাকে কাকে কি রেজাল্ট দিবে, এই ধরনের লেটার গুলা মানে কি, আনগ্রেডেড টার্ম এগুলা কি মানে সেগুলা হয় যে প্রিভিয়াসলি স্টাডি গাইডলাইন লার্নিং আওয়ার্স টাইম টেবল সিলেবাস। আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে। তোমাদের জন্য, শুধু তোমাদের জন্য না, আমার জন্য পার্সোনালি এই লিস্টটা অনেক বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট। এটা হচ্ছে চেঞ্জেস টু দ্য সিলেবাস ফর 2022। তোমরা তো পরীক্ষা দিবা, এইটু পরীক্ষা দিবা কখন? 2022 তে পরীক্ষা দিবা না? বলুন, মে জুন 2022 তে পরীক্ষা দিবা, রাইট?
জি স্যার।
হ্যাঁ। From 2022, A-level components will assume knowledge of the revised AS level content. From 2022, the A-level components will assume knowledge of the revised AS level content. তার মানে হচ্ছে তোমাদের A2 পরীক্ষা মানে তোমাদের A levels competing এক্সাম হচ্ছে 22 তে। সো 22 তে তারা অ্যাজিউম করে নেবে যে AS সিলেবাসে যে চেঞ্জগুলো আসছে তোমরা সেগুলোর ব্যাপারে অ্যাওয়্যার আছো। আইডিয়ালি you are not supposed to require that, but still সিলেবাসে যে ছোট ছোট ভ্যারিয়েশন গুলো আসছে আমি সেই ভ্যারিয়েশন গুলো তোমাদেরকে অল্প একটু হলেও জানাবো। স্পেশালি এখন এই সিলেবাসে অ্যাস্ট্রোনমি এন্ড কসমোলজি নামে নতুন একটা চ্যাপ্টার ইনক্লুড করা হয়েছে, যেখানে হাবলস কনস্ট্যান্ট এগুলো নিয়ে কিছু জিনিসপত্র দেওয়া হয়েছে। এই জিনিসটা আমি তোমাদেরকে ইন ডিউ টাইম একটু, যদিও এটা এস এর পার্ট, বাট আমি এই জিনিসটা তোমাদেরকে পড়াবো। The reason I'm going to teach you this is because by CAE people's authority, they can actually include a certain fraction of question from only exclusively from their syllabus. So যেহেতু এটা নতুন চ্যাপ্টার হিসেবে ইনক্লুড করছে, there is slight possibility তারা চাইলে ওখান থেকে তোমাদেরকে 5-6 মার্কের কোশ্চেন দিয়ে দিতে পারে। সো এটা আমি তোমাদেরকে ইন ডিউ টাইম পড়াবো। আর এছাড়া বাকি জিনিসগুলোতে আমাদের কিছু কিছু চেঞ্জ আসছে, এই চেঞ্জগুলো এখানে আছে। If any of you need to know the syllabus, you know how to use the syllabus. I don't have to tell you how to use the syllabus. I shouldn't have need to tell you how to use the syllabus, but just be careful about this list. এই লিস্টটা আমাদের কাজে লাগবে, at least আমার খুব ভালো মতন কাজে লাগবে। এই লিস্টটা আমার কেয়ারফুল থাকতে যে তোমাকে কি জিনিসপত্র বাদ দিছে, কি জিনিসপত্র নতুন ভাবে আসছে। সো এই জিনিসগুলা একটা দরকারি জিনিস। আচ্ছা, this is what I'm concluding the introduction part for the A2 class. I'm going to take a 5 minutes break and then I'm going to come back and we're going to start the first chapter, which is circular motion lecture. So 5 minutes. Hold on, break.